This is just a sampling of the pieces that can be created in counted cross stitch. Everything from nature scenes, to nostalgic remembrances, to commemorative samplers, to memo boards and accessories for your home. In the next hour, you'll learn how you can create heirloom pieces like these to grace your home or present as a gift. Hello, my name is Fran Fuller, and I'd like to welcome you to Plaid's View and Do video number 17 on counted cross stitch. This is a pastime that has brought me countless hours of pleasure, and I hope after viewing these instructions today will add many hours of pleasure to you. Counted cross stitch is a very old art form dating back as early as 4 BC. Women have used this art form through the ages to embellish everything from table linens to their clothing. A great deal is known about history and the lives of women in previous generations because of the needlework that has been left to us by these ladies. Because of the nature of counted cross stitch, most of us are self-taught because it's a very simple art form, but there are a lot of tips and techniques that can improve your needlework, and these are what I'd like to share with you today. So whether you're an avid stitcher or just discovering counted cross stitch for the first time, hopefully this will be just the beginning of many hours of pleasure for you. Before you start your counted cross stitch, there's some supplies you're going to need, and you can get these supplies by a visit to your local needlework shop or craft store. And the first thing you'll need to choose is a design to stitch. You want to pick something that you really love, that you would like to have in your home or give as a gift to a special friend or relative. The designs we're showing today are mostly from the Stony Creek collection. This is a company that publishes quality graphs and books of countless designs for your needlework. At your local needlework shop, you'll find thousands of other designs you can choose from. The next thing you'll need to select is a fabric to stitch your design on. Cross-stitch fabrics come in a wide variety of sizes and colors. This is just a sampling of the rainbow of colors that are available to you. These are even weave fabrics, and you need to get a good quality even weave fabric to stitch on. If you examine this fabric closely, which is called Aida cloth, you will see that it is made up of little squares on the fabric. It's an even weave fabric because there are the same number of stitches in 1 inch both horizontally and vertically. So if we measure 1 inch on this fabric, we'll find that there are 14 squares in 1 inch both horizontally and vertically. There are different counts of Aida fabric to stitch on, and the size of your fabric will determine the size of your design. The common sizes are 11 count, 14 count, 16 count, 18 count, and 22 count, also known as hardanger. Now I have stitched the same design here with the same number of stitches on different counts of fabric so you can see the difference in the design. This first one is on 11 count fabric. You'll see this is quite large. The next is on 14 count fabric. This is a little bit smaller. Then we have it stitched on 16 count fabric, 18 count fabric, and 22 count fabric, which is also known as hardanger. Now you will stitch with a different number of strands of floss depending on what size fabric you're stitching with. On the 11 count, traditionally you use 3 or 4 strands of floss. I often use 2 strands, and the piece that I have here today has been stitched with 2 strands. On 14 count fabric, you use 2 strands of floss. 16 count, 2 strands. 18 count, you can use 2 or 1 strand. I've stitched the example today with 1 strand of floss, and you'll see it gives you a more delicate look. Then also on the 22, you simply use 1 strand of floss. If you try to use more strands of floss on the smaller counts of fabric, you will find that you will get a very bulky look because you'll be trying to force too much fiber into your ground fabric. Now, when choosing your fibers, you have a wide array to choose from. Most of counted cross stitch is done using cotton embroidery floss. This is an assortment of DMC floss. For most stitchers, this is a dream come true here. This is an assortment of all 396 colors of DMC floss. And all of us aspire to have all 396 of these colors to use to do with our counter cross stitch so that we have it available to us. Then we also have flower thread. Flower thread is a flatter floss used more in country designs. Your nice luster on your regular cotton embroidery floss gives you a silk-like sheen and finish to your completed piece. But if you want a flatter, more country look, you can use flower thread. There's also pearl cotton that you can use. And then to enhance many of the pieces on Christmas stockings or for snow in pieces, there's all sorts of metallic threads and blending filaments to use. There's even fuzzy fibers for trees or Santa's beards or that type of thing. And then we also have beads that are used to embellish many of the pieces that are being done today. The next thing you have is your needles, and a needle in your counted cross stitch is very important because the size of the needle can distort your holes in your fabric, in your squares, if you're not using the proper size. You will need, I recommend having both a size 24 and a 26 tapestry needle. Now, in a tapestry needle, the ends are blunt. It's not sharp. So as you're stitching, you're not piercing the fibers in your fabric. The blunt end will actually slide off the fibers. Also, the larger the number on the needle, the finer the barrel will be. So it's very critical when you're stitching on your finer counts of fabrics that you stitch with that finer needle. I will tell you, I stitch exclusively with a size 26 needle, which is the finer needle, because it gives you no distortion even on the larger counts. We also have needles available in both gold and platinum, as well as nickel needles. These are fun. They make nice gifts. It's just kind of an extra pleasure to be stitching with gold or platinum when we're doing our needlework, but it has an added advantage. If you happen to be like me and have a very acidic system, I turn nickel needles black almost instantly. And gold needles, I will wear the gold off of them stitching in one day. But platinum is an inert metal, meaning it will not react with our body chemistry or the atmosphere. So when I'm stitching with a platinum needle, I do not wear the finish off of these. And you'll find the nicest part about it is, while you don't wear the finish off, it's just like stitching with no drag at all. It's just like a hot knife through butter. So they're a real joy to stitch with. There are a number of manufacturers of needles. I have just a few here today. There are different tools that you can stitch with. You can use an embroidery hoop, which is traditionally probably what is most familiar to all of us. You can choose to use nothing and just stitch in your hand, or there are also scroll frames available to stitch with, and we'll talk more about those items later. A good sharp pair of embroidery scissors is essential for cutting your floss and cutting your fabric as you're stitching. As you get into this, you'll find there's many different styles, and it's fun to collect them, and you have a different pair for your different moods depending on what you want to do. Good lighting wherever you're going to stitch is essential so that you don't have fatigue in your eyes and that you don't tire. If you need it, there are also a number of accessories that can help you with magnification as you're stitching and doing your needlework. There's a whole variety of things that you will find that you can use to keep track of your place when you're doing your needlework. This here happens to be a linotimer, and it attaches by static electricity on here, and you can move it up and down to keep your place. I also have this attached to a magnetic board here, which stays with magnetic strips to give some stability to my graph or chart, and then there's easels to display your work on or to hold your chart while you're stitching on it. One thing I might comment on is when you're stitching, always keep just a pencil by your needlework. Graphite can be removed from your fibers and fabric. Ink is usually a permanent stain, so kind of get used to just keeping a pencil by your needlework for any notes you might want to make. Then you'll find a whole array of other accessories to keep your floss systems. This is called a floss away system. These are just little Ziploc baggies, and you can put the whole skein of floss in here, or there's floss bobbins where you can wrap them around, and these are both just kept on rings. I will purchase the colors of floss for each individual piece I'm stitching, and then just keep the ring of floss with my project as I'm stitching on it, so I'm sure that I have the color floss that I need there with me. Needle safes are nice, as we've shown here. This is just a little magnetic case so that you can keep your scissors and your needles in there. Then there's rulers, and a chart to refer to for all of your colors of DMC floss are also handy things to have. When you purchase your design, when you decide what you want to stitch, your design is going to give you all the information that you're going to need to complete your project. And first of all, you want to purchase your fabric. And your design will give you, the chart will give you both your stitch count for the number of stitches both horizontally on your chart and vertically to give you your size of the piece. Then most designers will also give you the sizes for some of your most common stitch counts. Here we have 11, 14, 18. So if we wanted to stitch this piece on 14 count fabric, our finished design area is going to be approximately 5.5 by 5 3/8 inches. I'm sorry, 5 3/4 inches. Now you want to keep in mind that that is only your design area. That does not allow for any extra fabric, and we want to make sure we have plenty of fabric to complete our piece. So I recommend adding 6 to 8 inches to each of these measurements so that you will have 3 to 4 inches on each side of your design so that you're sure of having enough fabric to complete the piece into a pillow or frame it or do however you would like. While we're talking about fabric, I also want to recommend most fabric comes with a selvage edge on it. You always want to be sure and cut this selvage edge off of your fabric before you start stitching, and never frame with this on here. This is woven at a different tension than your fabric is, and it can cause distortion in your piece as you're stitching. Now that you've decided to, on your piece, and you've cut your fabric, you have your design area. If, say, you wanted this piece, but you wanted to stitch it on 16 count fabric, which is a fairly new size fabric that is out, you have to know how to figure your design area to know how large to cut your fabric. So in doing that, you have your stitch area, and you would take and divide your stitch area, your 76 stitches horizontally, by the number of stitches per inch on your fabric, which in this case would be 16. So by doing that, we would take our 76 divided by 16, which comes out to approximately 4.9 inches. I would round that off simply to 5 inches. To get our vertical length, we would take our 81, divide that by 16. It comes up to approximately 5.1. So I would round that off to 5.5. In doing needlework, you'll find more is always better. A little extra is always nice to have, but if you're short, there's not much you can do about that. So we would have a piece approximately 5 inches by 5.5 inches, and I would cut my piece of fabric approximately 13 by 14 in order to be able to stitch my needlework piece. Now we need to know what colors we need to complete our piece. And if we take a skein of the floss from DMC, you will see that each skein of floss is marked with a color number. And on the legend on your chart, you have the colors here, and you have a symbol. The symbol that corresponds on the chart will tell you what color to stitch in that square on your fabric. So you're going to need one skein of each of these colors of DMC floss in order to complete this particular piece. One skein of floss will be sufficient to complete a piece unless it's noted otherwise on your graph. If you should need more than one skein, the designer will tell you. It's very important to read all of the instructions before you start stitching the piece, because oftentimes there will be instructions here that will give us special instructions on back stitching or on half stitches or different things that we need to do. So there's a little note here that tells you what this particular piece was, what fabric it was stitched on in the model that they show on the cover of it. And it was done with 2 strands of floss with 1 strand for the back stitch. So you want to be sure to read all of those instructions on there. Now you will note on the sides here and at the top we have an arrow. These, if you follow these down to where these 2 points meet, that point will be the center of your graph. And this is your focal point for marking the center on your fabric to center your piece and to mark it on your fabric and your graph, because you want to make sure after you've cut your piece of needlework, you want to be sure that you have it centered on your piece of fabric. Now, to find the center on our piece of fabric, we're going to fold our fabric in half once horizontally. We're going to fold it in half again, and the point where that meets is our center. And I mark this with a single stitch of floss. Now, I use floss to mark this with rather than pens or pencils or any of the disappearing pens, because I know that, the floss will have no long-term effects on the fabric. Pens and inks are chemically based, and I do not know what the long-term effects of that would be, and I certainly don't want to do anything to harm my needlework, because I want this to be around for a while. If you're going to stitch with a hoop or in your hand, you need to pre-finish the edges of your fabric so that you do not have any raveling on it. And I just simply zigzag around the edges with my sewing machine on there. Again, I use this versus masking tape or some other methods because I know there will be no long-term damage to my fabric from the stitching on the zigzag, and I can just take it out later or even leave it in there when I frame the piece. This is another method of marking your center of your needlework that sometimes you might find helpful. I've simply run a basting stitch down the center line, the center vertical and horizontal line of my fabric. And again, where this meets in my center is the center. And if I want to move around on my design, I can do that because this would correspond with the center on my piece. It's important to know how to use the tools that you're going to use in your cross stitch so that you get the best results from your needlework. If you're going to use a hoop, I do recommend pre-finishing the edges of your fabric. This is a screw type hoop that I have here, and you want to unscrew this to loosen the tension on your hoop. And if you're right-handed, you're going to want to place your screw at the 10 o'clock position or to the left-hand side. If you're left-handed, you want to place it to the right side or the 2 o'clock position to do this. Now, since I'm right-handed, we'll turn this over here and put it at the 10 o'clock position. I will lay my large outer ring down, and I'm going to place my fabric on top of that, and then I will place my hoop inside of this. And I want a nice, firm, even tension to stitch on. Placing this inside, now I will tighten my screw back down. Now, and that's nice and taut, and the fabric's nice and tight. We'll be ready to stitch. Now, I have stitched this so this is the front of my needlework so that my hands will only touch the back of my work as I'm stitching. My screw is here, and I'm going to fold this fabric over. Even if I had a large amount, I would fold this over so that I hold this as I'm stitching. I'm only touching the back side of my needlework. And this will help keep my piece clean. It's important to keep your hands as clean as you can while you're stitching. You don't want to get any stains or soils on it. We have natural body oils that are naturally transferred to our needlework. But by stitching this so you're only touching to the back side, it does help if you get a permanent stain or soil that at least it's on the back side of your needlework and the piece is not lost. You can also stitch in your hand, and this is something we don't have time to go into today, just holding the fabric in your hand, but I would recommend that you check with your local needlework shop or shop owner to find a class in this, because when you're stitching on afghans or sweatshirts or the new duplicate stitch on sweaters, it's real important that you know this method for stitching. Now, a scroll frame is my choice for doing my needlework, and there are a number of advantages to scroll frames that I will point out to you. First of all, on your fabric, you want to cut your piece of fabric even on your grain line, both vertically and horizontally. A scroll frame will always come with a webbing or a tape that's attached to it, and you want to machine or hand baste your needlework directly to the webbing on the scroll rod. If you're going to hand baste it on, I do recommend using carpet thread or quilting thread because that is stronger. If putting it on by machine, then you just use your large basting stitch and just stitch it across. You do not need to pre-finish the edges of your fabric because there will be no stress on them while you're stitching on it. After you've attached it to your scroll frame, you simply roll to wherever you want to start your stitching. Place it in the extender bars. And this particular scroll frame I'm using is from Tomorrow's Treasures. And I like this scroll frame because there is all metal hardware in the scroll rod and in the knobs, but there's no exposed metal on the outside of my frame. Now you just simply put your knobs down, put your knobs on, and tighten them down. And the first set of knobs you put on here is not going to give you any tension. This is just going to give you a leverage point to work from, but you do want to tighten this down so the knobs are tight. Now, I get the best leverage by taking this and rolling it away from me. Your tension is actually created by manually rolling the fabric around the scroll rod. When you get the tension you want, you simply tighten the knobs down and hold it. This way you're working the same way as your fabric's going on the rod. You're not working against yourself. Now, by working with this scroll frame, this gives me an attractive piece to display my needlework in while it's in progress. You cradle this just like you would a baby, and it eliminates having any fabric in your hand crumpled up to hold on to. And as the same with our hoop, the piece is stitched to the back side. So this will be the front of my work so that I'm holding this, working on it, adjusting it. My hands never touch the face of my needlework. I also urge you not to put your pieces in progress away. All forms of needlework are very traditional art. When you're not stitching on your piece, you can use a decorative easel such as this, and you can leave your pieces in progress out and display with them. This was very typical in 17th and 18th century homes. If you are emulating the country type of design, there was always a piece of needlework in progress in the living area of these homes. And you can enjoy your piece while it's in progress, and your friends and neighbors can watch your progress, and it's out, so it's always ready to work on. There's no setup time at all. When you're using your hoop, you want to be very, very sure when you're finished with your stitching that you always remove your needlework from the hoop when you're finished stitching on it so that there will be no permanent distortion. As you can see, the ring that we have here just from that short time. You don't want to take a chance of getting any permanent rings in your needlework. And also you want to be sure to wash your hoop each night when you finish or each time you stop finishing, because the body oils and dirt will collect on here and it will transfer to your fabric if you don't wash those out. So that's something that's real important to do. Okay, we've gone over the supplies you will need to do your cross stitch and learn the basics of it. Now we're ready to learn the 5 basic stitches that are used in your cross stitch. Before we can start our actual stitching, we have to learn about some of the properties of floss. Embroidery floss comes to us in these skeins of 6-strand links that we work from. I cut a length my arm span, which for most of us is 36 to 44 inches, and we'll learn why on that as we go along. If you look at floss closely under a microscope, you will see it has a nap to it, meaning it has a right and a wrong end. We can determine the right and wrong end of the floss by taking and holding the floss between our thumb and forefinger, and if you just tap the ends lightly with your opposite hand, you'll see that the fibers on one end separate out and flare more readily than they do the others. On the left-hand side here, you'll see the fibers are still clumped together, but they have spread out and flared out more on the right-hand side. This process is called blossoming, and the end where the fibers flare out most readily is the right end, and this is the end we always want to pull our floss from. Now, even if I were going to use all 6 strands of this floss, I would ply each strand out individually and put it back together again. This is wound together by machine at the factory in order to come to us in the 6-strand bodies. I want to take the twist out of this floss. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to continue holding the body of floss between my thumb and forefinger, grasp one strand, pull straight up on it. It will look like it's going to tangle, but it will fall right back out. If your floss tangles, you're pulling from the wrong end. Now, as I said, even if I'm going to use all 6 strands of this, I would ply each one out individually. Because if I took this body of floss right now and just threaded it through my needle, I would still have this twisted braided effect to my floss. But by plying each strand out individually, it will give me twice the coverage that I would have if I just threaded this through my needle. And it will give you a lot less twisting. So you have fibers that lay nice and flat against each other. That's our ultimate goal. Now, you will see this floss still is wrinkled and crumply here. Again, so we have nice, flat, non-twisted stitches. We want to take this twist and crumple out of the floss. I keep a damp sponge by where I'm doing my needlework. And I will take this floss now and simply run it over my damp sponge. You don't want this real wet, you just want it damp. And you will see now that the floss looks just like it's been ironed. Let me back up just a minute and I want to tell you a couple other things that running the floss over the sponge does. One of the nice things about the DMC floss is the natural sheen and luster it has to it. And by running this over the sponge, you're actually fluffing up the nap on the floss that we talked about, and you're also bringing up that sheen and luster even more. Now, in counted cross stitch, we never have knots. And we want to not have any tails on the back of our needlework, and I want to stitch with 2 strands. So I'm now folding my length of floss in half. So I have a loop here at the end, and I have my 2 loose ends here. Now I'm going to take and thread the 2 loose ends through my needle, and I'm using a size 26 needle. As I mentioned before, I stitched exclusively with the size 26, which is the finer needle. Now, I have my 2 loose ends here, and I have my loop at the lower end of my floss. By folding this in half, we're now stitching with an 18 to 22 inch length of floss, which is the length we want to stitch with. We're stitching today on the scroll frame because that is my preference, and we want to come up from the back side of our needlework in the lower left-hand corner of the square where we want to start our first stitch. Go down in the upper right-hand corner, go to the back side of our needlework, put our needle through the loop, and pull it up so we have no tail to hide. This is a wonderful method of starting your stitches when you're doing pieces that have a lot of color changes. You're stopping and starting, changing colors of floss a lot, and also doing just pieces where there's a stitch here and there, or if you're doing lettering. Now, there's 5 basic stitches in our cross stitch. There's the full cross stitch, half stitches, 3/4 stitches, quarter stitches, and back stitches. Most of your needlework, most of your counted cross stitch is done in the full cross stitch. We're going to do some practice stitches here just so you can become familiar with them without following a graph, and then we'll go over some instances on how to recognize these on your graph and how they're utilized. On your full cross stitches, first of all, you want to go and stitch your bottom diagonal first. And the basic rule is you stitch your piece from left to right and from top to bottom. As you're going across doing your stitches now, having prepared your floss the way we've done, you should find that your stitches are laying nice and flat against each other, and you're having very little twist to your floss. It's important that all of your stitches go in the same direction. Now, all of us do tend to twist our floss as we stitch, so it's important every so often to drop our needle, let our floss untwist, even put our thumbnail between it, let it untwist. If it gets real twisted, you can take your damp sponge, run it back over the floss again, and that will straighten it back out for you. You'll find that darker colors will twist more than light, and as your floss gets shorter, it will tend to twist more. Now, as you come back and cross your stitches, you're going to go from the lower right-hand corner to the upper left-hand corner. This completes your X and crosses it. If you watch closely, we all tend to twist our needle in one direction or another. And if you watch which way you twist, and as you make your stitches, if you will just roll your needle a half turn between your thumb and forefinger with each stitch, you'll find that you will compensate for that twisting and have to drop your needle a lot less often. One of the things I like to say about counting cross stitch is it's somewhat like the English language, is that we have a whole set of rules and then we have exceptions to all those rules. And one of those rules is when we're doing a single row of vertical stitches. We're doing a single row of vertical stitches. We're still going to come up in the lower left-hand corner, go down in the upper right, and then come up in the lower right, go down in the upper left, and now we're going to cross our stitches as we go. If you've ever done a single row of vertical stitches and gone down and done one diagonal first and then come back and cross them, and you felt that your vertical stitches look longer and skinnier than your horizontal stitches, it's because they are. It's the way you're pulling the tension on the fabric. But if you will cross your stitches as you go, you'll find you'll have nice full stitches just like your horizontal stitches. Now we're going to talk about the back of the work and ending our work here. I turn this over for you after we complete these stitches. You will see that I have nice, neat vertical stitches in here, little soldiers all in a row, and that's the optimum of what we want to create. On the piece that I have here that we're stitching, this is a nice graphic piece, so it's very easy to have the vertical stitches. We don't have real frequent color changes. But on the back side of the needlework, you see that we do have vertical rows. What we are trying to achieve here is we don't want any bulk or padding on the back of the needlework because we want nice, even stitches. We want to give the illusion of painting with floss or actually weaving the fiber into our ground fabric. This method that we're stitching, and you'll have the vertical stitch by stitching from the lower left to the upper right and the lower right to the upper left. This is the method that's taught at the Royal School of Needlework in London. So this will give you your vertical back to stitch with. Now when we're ending this, again, we still don't want to have any knots. And to continue to have our vertical back, what I'm going to do is whip stitch my thread right up this row. Now I don't want to go back into this last little stitch here because that's the last one I did, and that will come loose very easily. And I have a looser row here on the outside where I dropped down and did each stitch. So I'm going to run my needle under this row back here, and now I'm just going to whip stitch up each one of these stitches. This is a really nice way of ending your stitches. It anchors them with each one. If you're doing afghans or baby bibs or hand towels, this gives a real nice, neat look to the back side of your needlework. And now that's anchored, and 5 to 6 stitches is what I normally use to anchor my stitches. Now, unfortunately, we will not always have a vertical row to end our stitches on. When I do not have a vertical row, what I do is I bring my needle and go under 3 stitches, bring the thread up, take one little back stitch over that 1/3 stitch, and then go under 3 more stitches. Now what I've done here, I've interlocked this at the 3rd stitch. I haven't created any knots or any bulk, but I've interlocked this so that our stitch cannot come loose on the front side. Often in competition we will see on an area with a piece that just here and there a stitch will come loose. And if you just run the stitch under your stitches on the back side without anchoring it, it can work loose in laundering or in time. But by taking that little interlock stitch there, you prevent it from working loose on your front side. Now we don't want to have any tails on the back of our work, so we're going to clip this real close to our needlework. You don't have to worry about it coming out. Now just as a little hint, if we wanted to use the same length of floss, we just had a couple of stitches to stitch somewhere and we didn't want to restart with our loop method, what I would do is take and run this under 6 stitches, pull it all the way up. Again, you don't want any tail to hide. Take one little back stitch over that last stitch, and this anchors the floss. Again, you don't have to worry about pulling it loose on the front side of your needlework. Now I'm going to rethread my needle here with a new length of floss to show you some of the other stitches. One of the things I will talk about on this is the tension when you're stitching on your needlework. one nice thing about the scroll frame is that you will find that the tension on the frame pretty much will dictate the tension on your stitch. But you don't want to pull your stitches so tight that you distort the square. You just want to lay it nice and flat in the fabric so that it is, again, that illusion of weaving it into your ground fabric. Now we'll start with our loop method again. We folded the floss in half. And we're going to come up in the lower left-hand corner where we want to start the stitch, go down in the upper right, coming to the back side and putting our needle through that loop. We've made the first half of our stitch, and this is exactly what that is. That is a half stitch. Half stitches are used frequently in shading areas or when a designer wants to make an area recede to give some dimensional effect to the needlework. And you'll notice I just pull the floss down till it just is even with the fabric so that it's no pull, but it's not loose on the fabric either. Okay, these are your half stitches. Now, in order to do a quarter stitch, you're going to come up from, again, the corner of the square where you're going to start, where you want your quarter stitch, and you're going to go down right into the center of your square. This is where you'll find the size 26 finer needle is much nicer to have. With a 24 needle, even though this is 24 count fabric, the head of that needle is almost as big as the center of the square. So by using the 26 needle, I'm able to actually get in there, separate those fibers, and find the center of the square. And by doing that, then you can have nice, even quarter stitches that repeat themselves. These are used to round out edges and faces and edges on flowers. They give a lot of dimension and definition to a design. Now, if we're going to do a 3/4 stitch, and these fractions refer to exactly the portion of the square that it occupies. We're going to first make a quarter stitch, and then we're going to come back and cross to make a 3/4 stitch. There are very few real 3/4 stitches in counted cross stitch. Normally you will have your little quarter stitch that you will do in one color, and then you will wait till later because you will come back with a back stitch to outline in this part that is a 3/4 stitch. But occasionally in flowers and faces, we will have a 3/4 stitch. And you always want to do the quarter stitch part of it first, because by doing that, if you should not get exactly in the center of that square, by coming back with your half stitch secondly, then it's going to cover any part that you might have missed on there. Now, back stitching is used for definition. It's used a lot in lettering and to finish off your needlework. It's the part that really makes it come to life. And all those are single little straight stitches. And the thing here to remember is you always go back into your last stitch. Now here I could come up into this stitch, but I won't do that. I'm going to come here and I'm going to go back into my last stitch. This is going to give me nice, even, straight back stitches. If I came up in the stitch that I'm going down in here now, I'm going to have a zigzagged up and down type effect, which I don't want to create. Now if I'm going to change directions, in this instance now I will come up in the bottom of that stitch and change and go into whatever new direction I want to go in. And the reason I'm doing that here, I'll change directions again here in a minute, but on the back side of my needlework, you're going to see here that the stitches come back and they're straight, and there's just a skip stitch here. If I come down here to go back into my stitch, I would have a diagonal thread running across here. And I don't want to have that diagonal thread, because this way the stress on the floss, the tension is going the same direction that the stitch is going in. So my stitches on the front stay nice and straight. And depending on what your graph tells you, you may change and go off in any number of directions with your back stitching. You may go diagonally. There may be times when you would have a V-type shape. but you will follow your graph to do that in whatever direction that you want to go in. So just to review, the basic rules are we're going to stitch our piece from top to bottom. We'll do our stitches from left to right. Whenever possible, you want to come up in an unoccupied hole and go down in an occupied hole. This will keep you from pulling any floss or fuzzies from the back side of your needlework. And also you want to, going from, when we're doing quarter stitches, you want to come up in the corner hole and dive into the center. And that's a rule that will hold true for you in most types of decorative stitches that you're doing. And we're in with this, and now we'll look at some individual circumstances and learn how to recognize these stitches on a graph and how to apply them and how to start pieces. When starting your needlework, you have a number of different options about deciding exactly where you're going to start your stitching. And I want to use this graph as an example to show you some of your different options that you have and a tool that will make your decision and your counting easier. As we mentioned before, the arrows at the top and bottom, if you follow those over, it will give you your center. Now I have made a little circle here in the center with my pencil on this. You will notice on the chart you have blocks done out in dark lines. These dark lines indicate blocks of 10. As we stated, we stitch our piece from the top to the bottom. So if I wanted to start up here at the bow at the top with this stitch right here, I would count up 10, 20, 30, 40 stitches. I need to come back one and come over here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I will go up 39 stitches and over 5 stitches to begin right here. Now I can count off the individual squares on my fabric, 1, 2, 3, but this gets very tedious and is time consuming, and most of us are interrupted multiple times as we're counting our stitches. This is a wonderful little gadget called an Easy Count ruler, and what it is a 12-inch ruler marked off in your 11, 14, 18 and 22 counts. So by simply, this is 14 count fabric 14 count fabric we're stitching on here. So simply by laying my ruler and lining up the squares on the ruler with the squares on the fabric, I can come up to this point, which is 39 stitches, and then count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this will be the square that I will start my stitch in. It's very quick and it's very simple. And you can work your piece now from top to bottom. All of us view things differently, so you may decide you didn't want to count all the way up there and you didn't want to start your piece up there at the top. You could also choose to simply stitch this little motif right in the center here. And you might want to just go up here 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches and over 1 and start with this little symbol here. And then stitch this and go on across, come over here and stitch your heart and then stitch down and around. You might decide you want to start here with the lettering in your center and stitch greatest and work from there. Now we're working to the right side, and at some point we're going to have to count back over here to meet. But if you work over to this point and stitch down your right side here, you can simply turn your graph, and remember to also turn your fabric totally upside down a full 180 degrees. And now you don't have to count to this other side because you're right here and you can stitch your stitches across and come back down this side. You can never turn your pattern only 90 degrees. Your stitches will not be going in the same direction. But if you turn it a full 180 degrees, this gives you a lot of versatility in being able to get to different areas with a lot less counting. And I believe the less counting you have, the less chance you have for an error. So you can chart the path that would be most convenient for you. Now we discussed earlier about there would be some instances when we would not want to stitch with 2 strands of floss, when we would only be stitching with 1 strand or 3 strands. And I want to show you what you do about your tails at that point, because half stitches are being used a lot today for shading. And in that case, what I do is I leave a tail on the top of my work. I come up and leave a tail long enough that I can rethread through my needle. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch my half stitches. These also come out very easily. So rather than just stitching over my thread, I want to be sure that I can anchor it on the back side. Now you're not going to come back and cross these stitches as we did before. So when you come down to your next row, this you kind of stitch backwards. And now you'll come from the upper right-hand corner down to the lower left to make the diagonal on the next row always going in the same direction. And the diagonal on your half stitch will go in the direction of the bottom stitch of your full cross stitch. Okay, now I want to go back and end this stitch. I'll leave this tail here, but I have this tail up here. I have some stitches in here now. I have either a horizontal row or I have a vertical row. If I continued on down, I would have even more vertical stitches that I can pull this thread now from my front, rethread it through my needle, and if I had enough vertical stitches, I could whip stitch it around my vertical stitches, or since I only have 4 in this row here, then what I will do is bring it under 2 stitches, take our little back stitch over that second stitch, and now run it under 2 more. So you've anchored it. You can rest knowing that it will not come out, it will not come loose, and you've anchored those nicely. And then of course your tail here, you would just pull to the back side and end that in the same manner. We're just going to cut this off here now in the interest of time. On doing that, if you wanted to stitch with 3 strands, you would also use the same method. One other thing that you will find frequently in your needlework to dot eyes or to use as flowers or emphasis is French knots. And this is something most people tell me they have a real problem with. To do your French knots, you want to thread your needle with your loop method with 2 strands of floss normally. And you will come up from the back in your lower left-hand corner, go down as though you were going to do a quarter stitch for your first stitch to anchor your floss. Come to the back side, put your needle through the loop, and then you will bring your needle back up to the front and make your French knot right over that little quarter stitch that we just did. Now, to do the quarter stitch, the French knot, I will hold my frame against my body, pull the floss toward me, lay the needle on top of the floss, and I'm going to wrap the floss around my needle twice, go in as though I was going to do the French knot, go to the back side, and pulling my thread through, it creates a nice even French knot. The key to this is to pull your floss right down tight to the fabric. Your floss towards you, the needle on top, wrap it around twice, go in as though you were going to do a quarter stitch, the back side, and pull it through. Now you don't want to pull your floss so tight that you can't pull your needle through, but you do want it down flush with the fabric, and you can let go of the needle because it's stuck in the fabric there as you go to the back side. Again. By doing this, you will find they're not nearly as difficult as people find them to be, and they do enhance your needlework. I leave these till last to do because I don't want to roll them or crush them. However, they're not nearly as fragile as you would think, and you'll find with these that they're not going to come out. They're going to be nice and tight to your fabric, and you can see I can pick at these and they don't come loose. So this will give you nice even French knots on your needlework. This method that we've used where we came with the loose tail on the top of our needlework also works nicely for tweeting. Tweeting is a method that's being used frequently today to give us even a larger color range to work with, where you would use 2 strands of different colors of floss, and designers are using this frequently, so you can use your loose tail, your waste method at the top, leaving your tail on the top in order to do that, and then go back and hide your stitches. Okay, now I'd like to show you how to recognize your quarter stitches and 3/4 stitches on your graph. The quarter stitches, as we mentioned, gives definition to shapes and to sizes here. These are quarter stitches in the corners of the hands here, here, we have them here and here. What I want you to see is the quarter stitch is done in the quadrant of the square that it appears. This one here would be done in the lower right-hand corner of the square. This one would be done in the lower left-hand corner of the square. So whichever portion of the square the symbol lies in, that is the portion of the square that you would actually stitch your quarter stitch. Another thing you will find in your graphs and reading them, because graphs are larger, they're oftentimes split between two pages. This gray area that you see here corresponds to the two last squares on the previous page. So you do not want to restitch these two squares here on your next piece. This is just to show you where the graph overlaps as it's gone from one page to another. Another frequent area is when stitching faces. And in these, this is about the only time you're going to see a true 3/4 stitch. And I want you to see how you would stitch it and how to recognize it. These are shaping stitches along here where we're coming along to shape the face so that we have definition. This area here would be another area where you would have the shaping. And you'll notice that rather than just going with one square, our back stitch, our dark back stitch, has gone over two squares on the diagonal. Now to stitch, the way you would stitch this area right here, where we have the 3/4 stitch, where you have that single dot, again, the quarter stitch portion of that is in the upper left-hand corner of the square. So in this instance, I would come up in the upper left-hand corner of the square, go down into my center for my quarter stitch. Then I will come down in the lower left-hand corner of the square, go down in the upper right to complete, there's my 3/4 stitch. Now when I come back, we would change the color, and to complete this back stitch, I'm going to now come with my back stitch and go over two squares rather than just one. So I have shaped my face and I still have my colored area filled in with my needlework. You will become much more familiar with these as you go along, as you're doing stitching, and you will learn to recognize the different stitches and the different circumstances as they come up. I have stitched an element out of this particular graph to show you, first of all, the difference that your back stitch makes, and to also show you a different a method that will make this easier for you. This is the little bird that I have stitched, lifted as an element out of this particular graph. Now even just having stitched it here, you can see how much more definition he has on our graph than he does in our actual stitching piece. I have stitched everything in there up to this point except for his eye, because this is a frequent circumstance you'll find, and I want to show you how to make that easier and start your floss less times. The eye is stitched with two strands of floss, and we only have one stitch there. The back stitching now around the eye and around the beak and around the little bird is only done with one strand. And we're going to do this just starting one time. I've threaded my needle with my floss with the loop method. We're going to come up in the lower left again, go down in the upper right, put our needle through the loop, and we're going to bring it up, and we're going to complete our stitch now by going from the lower right to the upper left. Now our little bird has his eye, and we would normally need to end this at this point and restart our floss with one strand. But we're not going to do that. I'm going to come to the back side. I'm going to unthread my needle, And I'm going to separate my 2 strands of floss. You want to be sure that it's not twisted at the bottom there because you don't want to have any twisting. And now I will rethread my needle with the 1 strand. And I will end this on a vertical row. Now you will see we don't have the back is not quite as nice and neat as it was on some of our previous pieces because we've started and stopped our stitches a lot here. But I do have this vertical row. So I will whip stitch right down this vertical row of stitches for 5 or 6 stitches. And then I will bring this up and I will cut it off, and I will cut it close so that we do not have any tails. Then I will rethread my 1 strand of floss now through my needle to go back and complete the back stitch on my eye of the bird. This way we can come back up in here, follow our graph to just stitch around his eye, and we're doing it with 1 strand of floss. Remember to bring it so we're always going back into our last stitch, and then we have 1 little stitch here that gives him kind of a little eyelash. Now the rule is that to carry a stitch over on the back you can go over 4 stitches. Now legally I have 3 stitches here, so I could come over here and start doing my outline stitch around my little bird here, or I could start here on his beak. But to show you another little trick, what I'm going to do is come to the back side and I'm going to do what I call burying my floss. I'm just going to bring it out to the corner here and run it under my stitches. This is something you can use as an alternative rather than running your stitches so that they cover wide areas of fabric and sometimes can show through on your front side. If you bury your stitches, you can often do this in less space than it would take you to stop 1 thread and start a new one. So if you can run it horizontally under stitches that are already there, or again use your little whip stitch method to get down to whatever area you wish to do it on. And then you simply continue with your back stitch around the outline. And you can see just in the few stitches we've done here how our little bird just seems to come to life as though he could sing by having his features outlined. Okay, now we'll put this aside. As we're doing the stitches, I'd like to go back and show you how exactly I decided I was going to stitch this little bird. Because one of the things that make the Stony Creek designs as lovely as they are, and as we look at our little bird and see his subtle colors, the DMC floss that we're using, the lovely shading and the nice luster and sheen to it gives him the life and just makes it look like a piece of art. And to decide where I was going to start to do that, I stitch by color areas. I don't stitch across the row. This little symbol here on the outside, the bees, I started with this and brought this around and stitched these down to this point. Now rather than ending my floss there and again creating more bulk on the back of my work, I simply stored my needle and brought it up and kept that needle there until I needed it again, because I have more of the bees starting right here. So I went back and threaded the second shade of blue in the sea color through my needle, and I stitched from here down around to this point till I needed to pick up my bee again. So this again stops this, or excuse me, prevents you from having to stop and start more often than necessary. And then you can go on off over into your lighter shade of blue until you get your little bird all stitched down into color areas. If you have a problem keeping track of where you are in your graph, we showed earlier our Linotimers. This is a little static electricity thing you can use, available in a lot of your needlework shops or graphic stores. You can lay that over and just move it down to the line that you're on, and you can see where you are. Or another method I use is I will simply shade out with my pencil the stitch that I've done as I've stitched it. And I use pencil because if I should make a mistake, I can simply go back and erase my stitches and restitch it. I haven't done anything permanent to my graph. I'd like to stress to you that each and every piece you stitch becomes a legacy in its own right. And while your piece may not end up in a museum somewhere, if it is kept and cherished by a friend or loved one, then it does become an heirloom. And you should always sign your pieces of needlework. Cross stitch is a work of art. All works of art are signed. It should not be anything glaring. It should be very subtle. As you can see on this piece here that I have finished, I've just used simple block letters with my 2 initials and the full year. We're coming very close to the change of the century, and it's important to have that 1990 in there, because if this piece should become valuable in the future, it will be more valuable having 1990 rather than just the 90 in there. Another thing I'd like to stress to you to do is when we're stitching a piece, we may not think about where it's going to be 40, 50, or 60 years from now. But particularly when you're stitching wedding samplers or graduation commemorative samplers, baby samplers, that it is a nice touch to add things in there that are going on in the family at that time. Perhaps even take a picture of yourself, talk about aunts, uncles, and other people are there. And when that piece is finished, keep it, tuck it away in the envelope to remain with the piece. So as it's passed down through the generations, there's a legacy of your family that's left with that. Laundering your needlework is a critical part of it because your body oils are in your needlework even if you've washed your hands a million times while you've stitched it. We all have body oils that are now in the floss, they're in the fibers and the fabric, and they will act like magnets to collect dust if they're not laundered out. I would give you a resource for laundry instructions if you can locate a copy of Stony Creek Magazine's, their premier issue. This had laundry instructions in it. We do hope to cover this in a future View and Do video with plaid, and we'll give you more tips and techniques to improve your stitching and make it more enjoyable for you. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to share my love of County Cross Stitch with you today, and I hope this is just the beginning of your leaving your legacy in County Cross Stitch for future generations.